Good morning. I hope this daily connection finds you well. This morning we had Table Talk. Table Talk is one of our book groups that gather at church, and we talk about all areas of spirituality, life, family, love, Bible, you name it, we've talked about it. We just finished the book Learning to Walk in the Dark by Barbara Brown Taylor, and then we were starting to think, what are we going to talk about next? What are some of the issues of the day that we should see what our role is and where our faith and spirituality make connections with what's going on in our world. And so we decided to take up this book, A Good Time for the Truth, Race in Minnesota. And it is edited by Soon Young Sheen. And it is articles written by authors from Minnesota, persons of color, sharing their experience, their direct first-hand experience of what it's like to be a person of color in the state of Minnesota. And as our conversation evolved, we started talking about white privilege. What does that mean in the midst of this? And how then, as white people, can we have an honest conversation about what race is like, what it means to be black in Minnesota and in America, and how then, as white people, we don't get so defensive about all of this. How can we have an honest conversation about race? As the day has moved on, I opened up one of my journals, The Christian Century, where Peter Marty wrote an article about letting go of white defensiveness. And I would like to share with you what he wrote, as I think it really talks about what we were talking about earlier today as well. And he writes, one of the unspoken privileges of being white in America is the privilege to assume that racism is not a pressing topic. To many white people, it makes little sense to expend energy talking about something largely remote from their daily experience. Race is what other people have, and racism is what other people are responsible for. When one's life is shaped within the confines of neighborhoods, schools, workplaces, and worship settings that are mostly or entirely white, whiteness feels quintessentially American. It's normal, the standard, the default. Every other skin color is abnormal, other, or diverse. Because structural racism gets discussed so reluctantly within white enclaves, it's little wonder that racial illiteracy rears its head when a death like George Floyd's occurs and millions take to the streets. Suddenly, white innocence gets exposed and people race to catch up on what they have largely ignored. Hefty reading lists get shared. Anti-racism titles go on back order. Uncomfortable conversations about white privilege tumble into the open as people try out new vocabularies and test their voice. Racial credentialing enters the scene too, like, I have a couple of friends who are black. Shaming goes on a rampage, guilt ratchets up, defensiveness shifts into high gear. I've noticed that few subjects spark defensive behaviors among white people quite like white privilege. Plenty of folks take umbrage at that label because it feels to them like an accusation of personal racism, a threat to their way of life, an indictment of their niceness. To them, the word privilege connotes visible perks or benefits usually associated with class or wealth. What they don't see is a racialized society where privilege is essentially an exemption from the weighty psychic burdens that afflict black people every day. If you're white, you don't have to deal with negative assumptions being made about you based on the color of your skin. If you're black, you deal with it every day. As someone has put it, white privilege doesn't mean your life isn't hard. It just means the color of your skin isn't one of the things that makes it harder. Here's what the Christian faith helps Reverend Peter Marty know. and reminds him to tell my most defensive-minded friends, look, you have some tools in the toolbox of your faith life that are exciting to put to work in our world of racial inequality. Start by letting go of the defensiveness. That's a must. It's a constrictive survival response that only separates you from God. I know we equate letting go of something, including cherished assumptions, with deprivation, but claw marks don't set you free. According to Jesus, relinquishment is a ticket to abundant life. Re-examining personal behaviors and perspectives isn't just a Lenten project. We no longer have the luxury of living racially unaware lives. Where you feel uncomfortable, disempower it. Let go of your brittleness. The Lord helps us know that we don't have to secure ourselves against insecurity. So relax into the power of faith. Do some soul searching. Take what scares the hell out of you about yourself and pick it up, much like that cross Jesus mentions. Then move your ego aside, much like that denying of self that Jesus commands, and live. Live with the mind of Christ, humbly open to changing all that needs to be changed about you and your world. This was an article written by Peter Marty, Letting Go of White Defensiveness. And I think there is something we can hold on to in the midst of that. As I think about the conversation I had earlier today with our table talk group, and how then we can be extremely open with one another as we talk about race. How we can share empathy, how we can be compassionate, and how we can truly listen to one another. That's going to be the key to this conversation, is listening with an open heart, so that then in the midst of this, we can make systemic changes to our world. God's light and love be with you on this day. God's light and love move us in places we never imagined. May God's light and love be with us as we continue to realize what exactly it means to be open and affirming and welcoming to all. God's light and love be with you on this day, and I'll see you tomorrow.